My passport looks wrong. British for nationality, Chinese by ethnicity, living in an American democracy, stamped through customs internationally. It's my passport to pain, culture of shame, teased for not being the same. Too Chinese to be American, too American to be Chinese. Found solace in my need to please. I put on a mask, a face, also known as a mian in Chinese, to hide myself, hide my pain, hide my shame, so no one can see.
Sam Louie is a psychotherapist, motivational speaker, author, and as you can tell from the poem that he just read, a spoken word poet. America is often referred to as a melting pot, a place where different people from different backgrounds blend and merge with one another to become something entirely new. But that word melt, it feels kind of easy, passive, something chocolate does in the sun. And for many people, this blending of culture, language, beliefs, and race feels much more like a collision. This collision of culture, also known as intersectionality, is not easy. It can sometimes cause people to cope with stress or trauma or pressures in a way that isn't healthy. Today, we are going to navigate the tricky waters of race, language, and beliefs, and how it can lead someone to turn to addiction, substance use, or be the trauma that creates a mental health condition. What's more is that we'll learn how Sam Louie didn't just sort through this stuff, he used it as a way to help other people too. I'm Clem Alley, and this is Real, Common, Treatable, a real talk podcast about overcoming mental health, addiction, and substance use challenges. Intersectionality is hard for anyone, but as Sam describes, it can be especially hard as a kid.
So my parents, we were all first generation immigrants from Hong Kong. So at the time, Hong Kong was a British colony for up until I think 96 or 97 during the transfer back to China. So that's why in the poem, it was British for nationality, because our passports were British. We're British citizens. But ethnically, we're Chinese living in Hong Kong. Parents at a very late age in their life, mom was in her late 20s, dad was in his early 30s, neither knew any English, but moved to the Seattle, Washington area because my dad got sponsored by a restaurant to work as one of their chefs, as a Chinese chef. So then we moved to South Seattle, and to add another crinkle to the identity issue or crisis, is it was predominantly an African-American neighborhood. So now you have all kinds of things running through my head, like how do I fit into this culture, just the wider mainstream culture of America coming from Hong Kong. My parents are speaking Cantonese to us. We can't really speak Cantonese very well because we're trying to acculturate with English. So there's a rift there. And we're trying to understand what exactly does it mean to fit into Black America. So there's a lot there, but maybe one big component is my parents they're very traditional. And when I say traditional, Asian cultures are more collectivist in nature. So everything is more about harmony, togetherness, groupthink. Western countries are more independent and autonomy focused, where you're thinking more about the individual. What do you want to do? What do you want to make out of your life? What do you want to study? What are your thoughts? What are your opinions? Raise your hand. I want to hear you. Please question authority. These are the things that we're being taught in grade school, but it's a huge culture clash because at home, we're taught to just listen and obey. Authority and hierarchy matter, patriarchy as well. The eldest have the most reverence. So we're trying to figure out, like, how do you navigate these multiple worlds? And it's very challenging because I'm being taught at school to question authority, ask questions, think on your own. Don't always take everything just for what's said. Really do critical thinking. But then on the home end, it's no. Do not question authority. Do not ask questions. Do not do any critical thinking.
What do you do when you can't completely fit in with your parents' culture or the place where you were born and your new home? How does someone navigate this kind of tension? For example, appearances and language. It's one of the easiest boundary markers that can make you feel like an outsider.
Yeah, I think that was the hardest part is obviously I'm Asian and I'm looking Asian. And then in the poem, I'm too Asian looking to appear American. And then I'm also too American to be Chinese amongst my own culture, my family's, my extended family and my parents' friends. And so they would joke about our language proficiency. It's not quite good enough. They could tell that we're too Americanized. So there's some teasing there.
This feeling of trying to fit in is present in all aspects of life. And as Sam explains, and as most immigrants already know, it follows you into the workplace.
When I was 16, I wanted to work because I was able to legally work and get a real job. So there was a McDonald's, and I remember at the time it was all African-American employees. The manager interviewed me. He was African-American. I didn't get the job, and a part of me wondered, was it because I'm not Black? So kind of racial consciousness is starting to develop. How much is race impacting certain areas of my life? And then I go down to the next city over and apply at a car wash, which ironically was an all-white employed place. They gave me some sort of psychological testing that really threw me off. Have you ever stolen anything in your life? Have you ever lied? And being like, trying to be good, no. What do they want to hear? I probably flunked the test because I never got the call back. I didn't get that job. And the job that I did get came from my uncle who knew the owner of a Chinese grocery store a few miles down. So I was a grocery bagger. But everybody there was very, well, they're like my parents. They could speak fluent Cantonese and they would gently tease me that I couldn't quite understand the nuances of my culture. So those three, that short, brief time in getting my first real job at 16 made me realize, gosh, I don't really fit anywhere. Even though I feel like I'm part of the Black community and understand the culture, couldn't fit in or get hired there. Wanted to get hired at the car wash, employed, it was all white, didn't get there. And then even in the Asian or Chinese environment of the grocery store, didn't feel like I fit in there.
Every culture has its unique characteristics that have been developed over hundreds of years and for a variety of reasons. In the Chinese culture, Louie describes the honor-shame system. Here is one of his poems to summarize the idea.
We do everything to escape from shame, do anything to deliver honor to ourselves, honor to our family, honor to our culture, yes, even honor to our dead ancestors. To do so, we hide our true selves, hide our imperfections, hide our emotions, revealing nothing to no one.
The Chinese relationship with honor and shame goes way back. Let's do a little bit of word history.
It's important to highlight because a lot of folks from Western cultures are not familiar with Asian shame. Somebody wrote a research paper that detailed there are more than 100 Chinese phrases related to shame, similar to native indigenous Alaskans who they say there are dozens of ways to describe snow. Wow, I had no idea until I came upon that paper in my own research. And one of the lines mentioned, so shamed that my ancestors of 8 generations can feel it. I do some presentations and teaching periodically, and I was speaking to a group from mainland China, and I said, I don't know, because I'm just reading it academically, so I wanted to touch base with the source. And I was like, hey, folks, you guys live in China, grew up in China. Is this quote for real? And they say, no, that is true. And some would say, I only thought it went back 4 generations. I didn't know it went back 8 generations. But there's that piece of filial piety where you really do not want to do anything that can upset the cultural apple cart.
The idea of having a public persona or putting on a mask when we're in certain situations is definitely not new. We act different around close friends compared to our boss or coworkers. We wear makeup when we go out and none at all when we watch Netflix in our sweatpants. But this idea of wearing a mask goes way deep in Chinese culture too.
So in the Chinese language, Mian is the Chinese word for face, but it's also the same word for mask. And it's so appropriate because in the culture, we are always trying to mask and hide our true selves, hide our face to the world. We are presenting ourselves in a different manner than how we are truly thinking or feeling.
You may be thinking, why is shame such a big deal in Chinese culture? Well, as Louie describes, it's definitely not without its reasons. The flip side of shame is honor, and striving for cultural honor can be the thing to help a country overcome tremendous obstacles, like British colonization.
So much of our culture is predicated on honor, obedience, group harmony, but also preserving our cultural honor. As much as I talk about shame, the flip side of that is honor. It's two sides to the same coin. So there's a really strong precedent to honor your family and your culture. Why? Because we want to make sure that it ensures the next generation has the best chance of garnering respect. Maybe to put it in more practical terms, if I go to Hong Kong and you're just socializing with people and meeting people, let's say you shake hands. In America or Western world, what's your name, right? In Asia, what is your surname? What is your family name? And so I would say, I'm a Louie. And then they would go into their memory bank. Oh, do I know any Louies? What are the associations with the Louies? Are they good people? Have they been known through the generations as being crooked? Are they trustworthy? All these things play a role in terms of why there's such a need to preserve that sense of family honor.
This preserving of the family name, that pressure to bring honor to the family and also not bring shame to the family, it runs real deep. And the effect of this repression can make folks not want to seek help when it comes to mental health or addiction.
When I think about the collectivist culture, everything is predicated on preserving the family name, the cultural heritage, and honoring the Chinese culture. So honoring your name, your family, everything is about the we, as I mentioned. So early on in my life, my parents taught me how to write my name. When you write your name in Chinese, it's your last name first. So they circled the Louie portion and say, Sam, it doesn't matter who you are as an individual, this is what matters most. So whatever you do, you have to make sure you honor the Louie family and the larger, broader Chinese culture. And then for me, that means the Asian collective. And then how does this tie in with shame? Is that anything you do, say, that could reflect poorly on you, then that can be considered very shameful. And you're going to want to hide that. We collectively don't want to taint our family name. We don't want to taint other people. Other people may feel tainted if they know about whatever shameful piece we're undergoing. So when I work with clients, it could mean anything from a divorce. It could mean bankruptcy. It could be dealing with mental health issues. All of that could be too shameful to disclose to another person.
For Louie, the repression of shame, the pressure to honor the family, all that stuff built up and affected him in a really deep way. He wrote another poem to describe his experience.
Multiple maladies. My drug of choice is not one over the other. Instead, it's whatever my heart desires or treasures. Some days sex, some days booze, other days a pack of smokes. It can also include binging on food. I swing back and forth, whatever the mood dictates my day. Drinking gin and juice can be another way to escape my wounds. Poker and blackjack gives me a rush. Living life with multiple addictions, maladies. Oh, that sums up all my addictive tragedies.
Sam started a slow spiral into addiction. The honor-shame principle was important to define because, as you'll see from his experience, it led him to gradually seek gratification and love in other ways outside of his family.
I think, yeah, as you had mentioned, Clint, people, even though I specialize a lot with the pornography and sex addiction is at the core still a desire to really heal from our inability to be emotionally intimate with another person, to really reveal our vulnerabilities, our deepest fears. Part of it is because of my own shame-based background that tipped the scale to making me more vulnerable to addiction. So I think I started off with what felt like very healthy things that when I look back, didn't even mention in here, sports. I was very active in sports. But when I say active, Seattle, it rains a lot. And I remember I would just take the ball and go outside and play basketball by myself just for hours at a day to escape. So not necessarily for like sports and the healthy aspect of sports, but really to escape the misery of being at home, inability to connect with my parents, inability to connect with my brothers. So it started with sports, then it led to music. Like, oh wow, I found music. I could just listen to music for hours on end to distract myself from the starkness, the emotional bleakness of home. And once again, it's not about blaming the parents. It's just recognizing that that was my reality. I really wanted to relate to my parents, but because of our cultural and linguistic barriers, let alone my dad was working so many hours, both my parents were working a lot, there was nobody to relate to. So I had to find some way to cope with this emotional void. Found it initially through sports, found it in listening to music. Eventually, I started looking at, back then we had a lot of department store ads, Sears and so on and so forth. And I would just look at all kinds of ads and circle things that I wanted to buy, like toys and electronics, eventually lingerie ads, this and that. And then that fueled another compulsive, addictive piece that eventually led to pornography early on that escalated to sex, casual sex, sex, prostitutes, so on and so forth, where it just took a life of its own. Tried everything else, some drugs, some alcohol, felt like the porn piece really was the lock and key to my own addiction because I equated sex with love. I was searching for love, and that was the closest thing that I thought that resembled love and got the ball rolling in terms of my own addiction.
So when you're a part of a shame-based culture, how do you get help for addiction, which is already super stigmatized? When we come back, we'll talk about how someone can start to unpack their stuff when they've spent years hiding and repressing it. This podcast is brought to you by Sandstone Care. Sandstone Care provides teen and young adult specific mental health and substance abuse treatment. If you know you need help, but you're not sure where to start, go to sandstonecare.com to live chat or call the number in the description box. You'll talk to a real human being who will get to know you and your situation and connect you with the support that you need, even if it's not with them. Change is possible, and Sandstone Care is here to help. Okay, back to Sam. He's about to describe his addiction in more detail.
This was 20 years ago. Porn addiction wasn't really there weren't a lot of therapists that kind of understood it, let alone just the average layperson. So I was married at the time, and I remember my wife at the time, she came across me looking at porn in the middle of the night. She was disgusted. I was disgusted. There was a little bit of liberation, like, oh, wow, thank goodness that I don't have to hide this anymore. Now I can actually get help. But in terms of getting help, I wasn't sure how to present this to my family, my parents. I belonged to an Asian American Christian church at the time. So now we have another intersection of shame and culture and religion and sex. Like, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to say or do? So it was very hard because that was a very, initially a very shame-filled space in my life for about, I would say, a couple years. But it did coincide with healing because I found a therapist who, I don't know if we call it specialized at the day, but he was working with men in this area. So I joined his group. I was also working with a separate therapist one-on-one, trying to unpack this. But at the time, I really thought something was wrong with me, and something was, but it wasn't this shame place that I felt. I really felt, when we talk about shame, that I was born wrong, that I was defective, that this was a issue that I just needed to be, what's the right word? It was so bad that I felt like I just needed to be blotched out of this earth, that would take care of the situation. But in meeting the other men, which was instrumental, and then the one-on-one unpacking my own childhood and family history, I realized that, wow, there were a lot of challenges that I had to undergo that led me to compartmentalizing, coping through various means, and hiding, right? Emotionally hiding.
I think that it's important to point out that Sam is being super candid about his experience. Sure, this was a while ago, but because addiction is so stigmatized, we often don't know what people are going through. Even when hearing someone else's story can be the thing to help you feel understood and not alone, we often don't hear it. I asked how he worked up the bravery to tell his story and start working with people to unpack their own shame.
I think through my growth and through my own background in journalism, and a part of it is my own personality, I'm somewhat extroverted. All the pieces fit together that allowed me to do it. Allowed meaning I'm comfortably uncomfortable doing it. Whereas some people it would just be too much. You know what? I've grown through this, I can do it. And I believe this is the other piece. Because the culture is actually what prevents people from getting help, even for the smallest of nuances. So, like I have some clients that say, oh, I got into this Ivy League school, but I didn't get into that Ivy League school, and my parents shamed me for that. And I can't even understand that level of shame, because just getting into college was good enough for me. But I do that because I'm hoping maybe I can open up the door for others who are going through something similar.
Sam uses his story to help others change their story. He takes his shame and turns it into a tool. Yes, we have another awesome poem to highlight this point.
I used to hate my shame, run away from it, hide from it, ignore it, deny it, pretend it's not there. Now, like a parent to a child, I embrace it. No more shame in naming it, sharing it, using it to my advantage, helping others heal. Where I once whimpered, I now boldly proclaim it. Where I once drowned in it, I've now harnessed it. Like a mule, use it like a tool, redefined it. No longer a soul crusher. Use my shame, a light for others, to escape self-blame. I think in my own journey, the process of learning about my culture and my childhood, my environment. The other piece was growing up in poverty. Like we had free lunch throughout entire duration in school, as well as 90% of our peers. And I say that because I want people to realize that it takes a lot of openness to walk that line of introspection, understanding, without actually feeling like you're blaming your childhood or blaming your parents, but at the same time, not minimizing it either. So in the very early stages of my recovery or my healing or therapy, there was a lot of minimization. There's a lot of, when I say minimization, beyond, yes, the minimizing of the addiction too, the childhood wasn't that bad. It was fine. Like, you guys are just very emotionally, what's the right word? You're just not tough. That's what I was thinking. Like, why are you guys like just belaboring these issues all the time? It's not that bad. I was always taught to focus on the positive aspects of life, to always have a smile on my face. But eventually it clicked in group therapy when one of the group members said, you know what, Sam, you're just being fake. I was like, what do you mean? You talk about having a hard week, but you pretend like everything's fine. When are you going to be real? So there was like a direct challenge that I wasn't being real with my emotions and my thoughts. I was incongruent. That was about 8 months into group therapy, but I remember it started clicking thereafter. But it was hard because I didn't want to grieve. I didn't want to think that there was anything inherently challenging about my situation, because if you go through a challenging situation, you're probably going to think of 100 other people that have gone through similar challenging behavior or challenging situations in my neighborhood. Or I could think about the worldwide challenges. Hey, I'm not growing up in a starving country where I'm walking around with no food. Like, I had food, we had shelter. But in therapy, I also realized there was crime in my neighborhood. There was fear in my neighborhood. I'm growing up the oldest of three, not understanding everything was new to me. So I'm trying to figure out, what does it mean to go to even middle school? What does it mean to have 6 teachers? Or what does it mean to have your own locker combination? I can't process this with anybody. What does this mean to go to high school? What does it mean to take your SAT? What does it mean to apply for a college? I don't have any parental help. There's no adult help. There's no adult supervision. There's nobody helping you with homework. There's nobody reading to you. There's nobody even on the most trivial matters like holidays and folklore. There's nobody putting a dollar underneath my pillow when I lost my tooth. We have a 6-year-old and he's excited with the tooth fairy, right? There's no tooth fairy. There's no Easter bunny. There are no Christmas decorations growing up. Culturally, my parents were more Buddhist. Even Thanksgiving, there's no traditional anything. So everything I had to learn on my own. And as I learned on my own, I developed a bit of a tough skin that really made it difficult to peel back that layer and be open to seeing that my experience was hard. And to be able to just say that some of those experiences were hard and just hit period on it.
No matter who you are, mental health and addiction challenges are super hard. When you throw those in with the intersections of race, religion, culture, poverty, technology, gender, and probably 100 other things that I'm leaving out, it gets even more complicated. But as Sam shows, change is possible. Unpacking your stuff and not pushing it down and processing your experiences can help you to overcome mental health challenges or to stay sober long term. If you want to continue the discussion or if you have any questions, then join us in the free Real Common Treatable Facebook group. There you'll find real people just like you who are trying to navigate this stuff. Also, you can find links related to Sam Louie and all of his stuff in the show notes and description box below. If this episode was helpful or brought you any type of value, then please share it with a friend in need. Also, it would personally mean the world to me if you would leave us a review on Apple Podcast or wherever you're getting your podcast, or if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribing so that you can stay up to date when new podcasts come out. This is Clint Malley reminding you that you are not alone, that addiction and mental health challenges are real, but they're also common and they're also treatable. See you next time.